I'm so excited. It is my absolute pleasure to introduce my friend, Leonie van Drooge from the Rathenau Instituut. Leonie is a senior researcher there in the Netherlands. She's a science policy advisor, science policy researcher focusing on the organization and evaluation of societal impact. She's involved in many projects dedicated to these issues, and she's also a member of our ARIS Council of Experts, which is probably why she landed up here, because I'm always asking them to do something. She brings great experience to the study of societal impact. She studied chemistry and science dynamics at the Universities of Amsterdam and Manchester. She taught chemistry and society and worked as a knowledge transfer officer, which I think is super cool and I think that brings a perspective to this work. On a personal note, I first met Leonie at the Impact of Science conference in Amsterdam in 2016. I can't believe it's only been 4 years. I feel like I've known her forever. So it doesn't seem like nearly long enough. And I knew we would be friends and colleagues for life. Thank you, Esther, for putting us together. Since then, we've visited Coney Island together and spent a lot of time discussing impact policy. I'm very excited to hear her take on moving impact from promise to practice. So take it away.
Thank you very much, Susan. Thanks for the invitation. It's always nice to share my thoughts, experience, and expertise on the subject. And what I mentioned before, in these very strange times, and we've had a press conference by our Prime Minister yesterday night again, so there will be a lockdown light again in the Netherlands. It's impossible to visit you, but this is at least something that we can do, so that's very nice. So what I'll do is, I will share my screen with you and see whether that works out. Does it? Good.
It looks great.
So I will talk with you about societal impact in the Netherlands, from promise of relevance towards dedicated impact practices. And what I'll do in these 45 minutes, something like that, I'll introduce myself, the institute I work, and the Netherlands, to say something about why I, from the position I work, can say something about the Netherlands. Then a very brief history, and it's hardly worth the name history, of 5 decades of societal impact of academic research in the Netherlands. And then, knowing that ARIS is really dedicated to support societal impact, I will briefly say something about the current support ways to support societal impact at Dutch universities. And then I will move to far more dedicated impact practices and show you some interesting examples. And there's an extra, because I do like evaluation so much, I will say something about evaluation for impact. So why me? And that's what Susan said as well. So I am a researcher in science policy studies. I've dealt with impact and evaluation for over a decade now. But also I have experienced, I've been a practitioner myself. I've been involved as a technology transfer officer, and I've been involved in the science shop movement in the Netherlands, and I will say something later on about that. But I do study impact as well, so I've got a different experience as well. The Dutch Rathenau Institute is a science policy institute. We're funded directly by the government, but organized in such a way that we can act independently from government. And we're there to study and advise about everything and anything relating to science and research and innovation policy, both the consequences of the introduction of new technologies, as well as more science policy issues, such as I do. One of the subjects has been evaluation and impact for a long time. Now, the Netherlands is a small country in the northwest of Europe. We have an interesting university system. We've got 14 universities that are basically all the same. There's one dedicated agricultural university in Wageningen. There are 3 technical universities in Delft, Eindhoven, and in Twente, and the rest are broad generic universities, but still they all want to be excellent. They will all want to end up in the top of all the rankings, and whenever there's a policy change, then all the universities reply to it. and they do something extra. So societal impact, they do it extra. Excellence education, they do it extra. So that's has been a struggle in the Netherlands for some time now, that the universities do so much and they do everything, and they try to, so there's been policies that try to invite universities to get a bit of a known profile, and we see something of that later on in the presentation. Now we do have 40 plus universities of applied sciences, and they would be called university in the UK, in the US. They were what were the polytechnics in the UK, and they have a different system. They do have very different impact practices. Since they are dedicated to vocational training, there's far more impact practices going on there. Students do internships, there's far more collaboration, but I will focus on the traditional universities. So let's start with the brief history in 4 big steps. Now, of course, the history of impact doesn't start in the 1970s, the history of societal impact of universities. I mean, universities have been closely related to society forever. I mean, that was the origin. But after World War II, there was this short period where it was a bit more disconnected. And one could say that the reinvention of societal impact started, at least in the Netherlands, in the 1970s, shortly after the democratization of the university started with the student uprising in the late 1960s. And the first step was the opening of the science shops in almost all universities in the Netherlands in the 1970s by rather activist students and researchers working in universities who wanted to bring the science to the people, especially the not well-to-do people, those who couldn't afford access to universities. Several universities had generic science shops. Some universities had specialized science shops. This is a picture, and you can see the you know, with the banners, and I can see it even in the way that they spell, that it's spelled, that it's really like a very activist kind of language. And this is the law shop of one of the universities. So there people could go with questions, basic questions regarding a contract or a formal letter, and students, law students would work there and would help the people. So this was really a bottom-up approach of inviting people to come with their questions to universities, whether it was legal questions or chemical. I've been involved in the chemistry shop or otherwise. So that was a first movement of opening up the university again and bringing research, bringing the world of academia and society together. The science shops have remained in the Netherlands. They, at the end of the 1990s, beginning of this millennium, they more or less disappeared, but they came up again. And there's now a movement in Europe where at several universities, science shops pop up. It's mainly students now who do projects that are brought in by civil society organizations and the like. In the 1980s, and this is probably not different from the US, we see the first generation of technology transfer offices. And they were funded, interestingly enough, by the Ministry of Economic Affairs. And this is the formal signing of the document that said that the Ministry of Economic Affairs would fund tech transfer offices at all Dutch universities. The idea was that now that there were science shops and big companies had access to universities through endowed chairs and other ways, that what was left was SMEs. There was no way for SMEs to really have access to academia, to pose questions, to get help. Sorry. The first generation of tech transfer offices was really dedicated to helping out SMEs with their questions. And the idea was that after 5 years of external funding, the universities would take over the funding and would continue the tech transfer offices. So this was at the end of the 1980s, and what happened is that most universities flipped it around and said, so now we're going to advise internally about collaboration with external partners. The tech transfer offices, as the science shops, flourished until the 1990s. Some, I don't know, vanished and were reinvented, and now all universities have impact offices, valorization offices that are all more or less in line with the first tech transfer offices, and I will come back to that later. So we had support for in the science shops. We had the tech transfer offices, late 1980s, early 2000s. It was a bit quiet and silence on that front. And then in the beginning, so some 10 years ago, the idea that universities should contribute to society was revived and became an important issue in science policy at the national level in the Netherlands. And the concept of valorization was introduced, which is quite interesting because many researchers thought it meant selling out your research to companies, whereas the idea was that valorization would mean getting even more out of your research for a variety of partners, whether commercial or non-commercial, public or private. But at least it meant that the attention for what we now call impact was really put on the agenda of universities. And here you see a policy plan by one of the universities, and their visualization of what they think valorization was quite complex and complicated. And that's how many researchers perceived it. This, until this time, or the valorization, the ideas about valorization are very much, so what do you do? What research do you do? And is there anything else or anyone else that can benefit from that research as well? So it's very much focused on or starting from the idea that with the researcher, with the research organization, and then finding some other organization that could benefit from the research as well. So that is what I would say sometimes an anything goes approach. You know, the researcher and the research organization are in the lead when developing valorization plans, when thinking of whom to collaborate with or what to contribute to. But what we see later on in this decade, and of course the current COVID pandemic is a major illustration of it, is that dedicated contributions to specific societal issues are expected from universities as well. So not only is it expected that in general, universities ensure that the public society in general benefits somehow, some way from their research, but there's specific expectations now of certain dedicated contributions to certain societal problems. And there you see that in the Netherlands, certain schemes have been developed that stimulated. This is a picture of the development of the National Science Agenda, which was a huge effort in the Netherlands, where everyone was invited to submit questions to the science agenda. So in the end, 11,000 questions were submitted by citizens, of course, by researchers who thought, as long as we ensure that our questions are being submitted, then at least it will be on the agenda. And they were sorted out. And they were, you know, very basic questions that researchers said, oh, we know the answer already, to very interesting questions. Can you prove that God exists? And can you prove that he doesn't exist? You know, but both ways. And that had to be done with, which was an interesting enterprise, This is a picture of a conference where we were working on sorting it out with a variety of people. And that led many research organizations realized that there was really interest with non-scientists in their research. So they started reaching out and opening up and organizing open days for interested people. So we see a movement over the years from the bottom-up science shop to the technology transfer office that was organized by the Ministry of Economic Affairs, to the valorization idea of the Ministry of Science, to this more general idea that universities should contribute to certain specific problems. So there's several ministries that have dealt with it. We also see that the National Research Funder, NBO, has introduced knowledge utilization as a requirement, not just in the more dedicated calls, you know, the programs where a specific theme is addressed, but also in their research excellence scheme, where it's up to the researcher to come up with a proposal. In that scheme, the researcher is asked to think about knowledge utilization and to come up with a proposal, not just for the basic research, but also for utilization of knowledge outside of the own academic peer community. Now, what is important as well, of course, people always say, well, you know, research impact is interesting, but research excellence is expected in universities. So if you don't address the issue of impact or societal impact in, for instance, evaluation schemes, then it will be very difficult to maintain the focus on societal impact. Now, the Netherlands has a long-standing national research evaluation system, the Standard Evaluation Protocol, and societal relevance has been one of the criteria for a very long time. So the idea is that academic groups are being evaluated based on the research they do and the societal relevance of that research, as well as on the plans for future. Now, I know that there's been a presentation regarding the British REF. There is one major difference between the British system and the Dutch system, and that is that the Dutch system, it doesn't relate in any way to any financial contribution. This is something that Dutch universities need to do legally. It says in the law. So universities do research on the condition that they have a proper quality assessment system in place, period. So this is really a reflective system. That's how it's been developed, where research groups are being evaluated, and the idea is that you really reflect on what's happened and reflect on the future as well. But still, the idea that societal relevance is one of the criteria is, I think, really important for the focus on societal relevance. And there's two things which are important as well for the bigger attention for impact in the Netherlands. One is that we see the development of regional policies, where certain regions want to develop and promote themselves in a specific way. For instance, Wageningen, where the agricultural university is located, so that is the food valley, of course, and you recognize the word valley, that comes from your Silicon Valley, so we introduced that. But we've got other regional themes as well. And that meant that regional policy bodies suddenly became involved in research policy as well, reached out to universities, started collaborating. So now you see that in certain regions, the universities are far more than before located in their region, collaborating with other research organizations, companies, public organizations, and usually dedicated to a certain subject. food in Wageningen, automotive in a different part of the region, or smart, everything smart around Eindhoven, where the big company Philips is based. But Dutch universities and researchers are part of the European, we're in Europe, of course. The European Commission is an important research funder as well. And the European Commission has a long-standing research funding scheme, the framework programs for research and technological development. The idea has never been with that program to just fund excellence research, but to really make Europe a better, more competitive place. So the idea has always been impact, not just science for science's sake. But it's been very difficult to maintain that focus. So every time there's a new program, you see that the European Commission really does its best to ensure that the research now is really dedicated to contribute to a certain societal issue. So the European Commission has introduced the societal challenges, and they are a bit similar to the Sustainable Development Goals of the UN. And what we see now is that universities in the Netherlands relate to that as well. So there's talks about impact, expectations about impact. One thing is that really the idea that there are universities for a reason, not just to do science, but to contribute to something, that's been there for a long time. Several schemes support the idea of impact. Now, what is impact, societal impact in the Netherlands? So there's different words that I've used: valorization, impact, knowledge utilization, societal relevance. They basically all mean the same. And what is one of the core issues in the Netherlands when it comes to impact, that we see impact as a verb, which is its origin, it is to impact. So it's a process. So when we talk about impact in the Netherlands, and I mean, when you meet a researcher, she or he will probably say something else. There's some misconception, but the idea, the intention of our policy bodies and research funding organizations is that really it's important to show what impact someone tries to reach, but especially also how, what way, with whom, under what condition. So, and I think that is one thing which, when you look at the impact in several countries you see, or in several organizations, you see differences. So when you look within organizations, when you look at universities, and my former colleague Stefan de Jong is now looking at impact practices and policies in universities, you see clear differences. Every university has its own idea of what impact is, or should be, and how it should be approached. And that, of course, also has an influence on how researchers perceive impact. But in general, one could say in Netherlands that the idea, the verb, the to impact, is an important part of the impact policies. Now, if we look at the current support system for impact in the Netherlands, I mentioned before the tech transfer offices. All universities had one in the 1980s. Some, I don't know, just were closed down somewhere in the 1990s, beginning of this millennium. But at present, there's impact offices at every university. Some are called impact office, some are called a valorization office. They've got all sorts of names, but they're all dedicated to providing support for researchers. Now, they are still a bit similar to your tech transfer offices. What we see is that they all have a part where a granting office, where researchers are advised to apply for grants, where societal impact or valorization or knowledge utilization is an important aspect on how to go about. Now, if you look at the broader impacts, the way that I know it from Susan, not all offices are really dedicated to the broader impacts, apart from the fact when it's part of a grant scheme, it's still quite some commercialization, IP, spin-off, collaboration with private companies. What is interesting though is that in recent years, or I should say the last decade, there is a development of dedicated social science and humanities support staff. The idea is that, of course, there's also a potential to collaborate with. There's also a question for knowledge, social science, humanities knowledge outside of universities, and that it might require different expertise, different types of support than commercializations and spin-off. Now, if we look at the more recent, so this is still often working, not always, but often working from the idea that a researcher wants to collaborate or has potential to collaborate with a certain external partner. But what we see in more recent years is far more dedicated impact practices. So really dedicated towards a specific problem, a specific aspect of society in very many ways. There's two here. I will talk about the third one as well. So I mentioned before that what you see in the Netherlands is that all universities are very similar to each other. So one policy report said universities, you should really develop far more your own profile. And what happened, for instance, at the University of Utrecht, which is one of the largest universities in the Netherlands, they organized 4 major research themes, dynamics of youth being one of them. And they said that is, of course, also a way to really reach out to society, because research is really then, the University of Utrecht becomes known now as the research and expertise center when it comes to youth, which means that it's easier to reach out, for instance, to public health offices, to schools, etc. The interesting thing then is that at University of Utrecht there's 4 of these themes, and it's best if you're part of at least one of those themes. So I met a veterinarian researcher in the Dynamics of Youth Hub because he was studying young animals, and that's youth as well. But the interesting thing also is that this person then started talking with someone in, I think it was education sciences, and they realized how much knowledge and interest they had in common. So it's also a way of the university to really get different relations and connections within the research community between different parts of the university. So this is again still an idea from the university outside. But we also have the University of Groningen, which is located in Groningen, which is both a city and a province. Now, the province of Groningen is known in the Netherlands for the natural gas. So a part of the wealth of the Netherlands comes from the natural gas that we have been drilling out of Groningen for a long time now. And the last years, it became clear what the impact of that is. There's earthquakes now in Groningen, and the Netherlands is not really an earthquake country. We have very soft ground, and apparently drilling out of the gas meant that there's earthquakes, houses break, they really break, buildings break. So what did the University of Groningen do? Because they had lots of people approaching them with all sorts of questions regarding earthquakes. What's the value of my house? How do I talk to my children about earthquakes? I've got mental health issues because of the earthquakes. There's all types of these questions. So they said, why don't we, together with the University of Applied Sciences, gather all the researchers, all the knowledge we have regarding earthquakes, and ensure that we've got like one door, one window to Groningen, so that people and organizations from the region can approach us through that one door, that one entrance. And they don't have to look in the university for the right person with the right knowledge regarding earthquakes. So that is a very much a dedicated impact practice, which is rather new. And I would like to take you to another type of impact practice, and that is the academic workshop, the Academische Werkplaats. And they have been founded by, I think, the Ministry of Health. And they are health research hubs where academics collaborate with regional health services, with universities of applied science, and with all sorts of organizations in the region. And every academic workshop is dedicated to some specific problems. You see two pictures here. Both are from the academic workshop of the University of Maastricht in the south of the Netherlands. They've got several hubs, one on geriatrics, that's the left picture, and the right is very nice. That's a project called the Healthy Primary School. Here I would like to tell you something about that project, because you see what it means to really collaborate with external partners. And the interesting thing here is that the examples I'm showing you now, so this one and these as well, there's not really professional support for it. So we've got our impact offices and valorization offices that really deal with the traditional type of work. But these are practices where the researchers, together with their societal partners, really find out on the go how they best should collaborate. So the Healthy Primary School. So the University of Maastricht is located in the south of the Netherlands. There used to be a mining region. The mines closed down. Lots of people left the region. The university was founded in the region as a in exchange. But the south of Limburg is really one of the poor regions in the Netherlands. Obesity is an issue. Obesity with children is quite an issue in this region. So the researchers developed a plan together with the health office and a big primary school. They got funding from the province, and they said, we want to develop a concept where health is really the core of everything we do during a school day, which means we don't want children to bring food. We want them to make the food at school. We want it to be our choice what they eat. We want to have ample room for sports, etc., etc., which was quite an issue, because here you see what it means. And I've been involved early on, where researchers said, where the school district said, so we don't want to participate if not at least 75% of the teachers and the parents agree, because it's really a big change. So we really need the support. And for the researchers, that was quite, it was something else they didn't have to deal with, until they realized that of course it's in their benefit as well when the schools do participate. So here you see what a joint effort it is and what is really needed in order to get something like that going. So it was quite an issue to get this project starting. The school dropped out, but by now the schools who do participate are so popular that there's waiting lists for children. And the concept that has been developed is so successful that one of the ministers, the man with the red tie, even visited and said, this is something that we really want to share outside of our outside of the region, and you should really, scale it out and scale it up and ensure that also others will benefit from this. Which proves another problem, that the researchers said, well, we are not researchers in scaling out developments that we have done. So this is an extra challenge for really dedicated impact research, or research dedicated to impact. But I think it's quite a nice example where you see where researchers with stamina really manage to get something like this realized. So it's quite different from the, so if you apply for a grant, you should think about knowledge utilization as well. This is really a dedicated impact practice where collaborating with research, with societal partners is done on a day-to-day basis. Now, me as a researcher on science policy issues would say that means that you really are in a different way of knowledge production, and this is what we would call mode 2 knowledge production, where the knowledge is not produced purely in an academic context, starting from an academic question with academic peers, but where you are in this muddy, in this primary school with all the children, trying to test out things, taking into account very practical things, whether a school wants to collaborate or not, whether something is possible or not. You need a variety of knowledges. So there you see that the knowledge is developed really in the context of application, that you need knowledge, academic knowledge from several disciplines, as well as knowledge outside of that, transdisciplinary knowledge. And that means that what we would call you develop socially robust knowledge that really survives outside of academia as well. But that's really a big step, and it's not an easy one to take. But I see a movement where more groups are now moving towards this mode 2 knowledge production. So that is the bigger picture I see, the bigger movement that I see happening right now. Now here comes my my special interest in research evaluation, because if you think of it then, so in the Netherlands, that's maybe I should say one thing. The Netherlands in general is that the universities are quite good. When you look at rankings, and I don't like rankings that much, but still, we're nowhere near the top UK and US universities, but all universities are always, somewhere in the top 500 or top 200. They're all in it. Several of them are in the top 100. So they're all quite good, which means that one way researchers really feel now what it is to work in this research excellence environment where the pressure is so high, lots of stress, and also the Netherlands is doing so well that we can afford it maybe to make changes and to listen to researchers as well who say, well, I went to university because I want to contribute something to the world. So what we see now is that in the Netherlands there's an initiative, Recognition and Rewards, that says maybe we should think about research excellence in a different way. We should not focus on just journal articles and prestigious grants. We should think of research groups far more than individual researchers, portfolio of qualities that we need. We don't ask a researcher to be able to do everything and anything. If someone is very good in doing the basic research and another one has very good contacts with societal partners, maybe together they form a nice group, and then there might be someone who enjoys teaching far more than doing research. Hey, maybe that person can do more teaching. So there we see a movement now that the whole idea of research is just for academic excellence is changing. The University of Ghent in Belgium, where our friend Esther de Smet works, of course, they are working on a new way to think of how to think of what a researcher should be able to do as well. So I think that's an important thing. Now, I mentioned before that impact is a verb, and that's at least in the Netherlands how we think of it. So that means that impact is best evaluated with process indicators. Say if you say, well, impact is to impact, it's about to impact, it's about the whole process of ensuring that you make a societal contribution, then the question is, okay, so what is the societal contribution, but also how can you witness on the way that this societal contribution might happen, is in the process of happening. I've worked on a project before where we introduced the idea of productive interactions. The idea is that, well, without any interaction, there's probably no impact at all. And a productive interaction is an interaction where either the researcher or the societal partner might think, oh, hang on, and change something. So productive interaction might lead to a researcher saying, hang on, that didn't work. That wasn't socially robust. Maybe I should change something. Or it might lead to a user, a next in line, who says, aha, that's an interesting concept, or I never thought about it, or start using something. And then the question, for instance, in the examples I showed in the previous slide, whose impact is it anyway? Who decides what a good impact is? And who is needed in order to realize that impact? And that means, and who do you invite when you evaluate the impact? And there you see that there's sophisticated ways to evaluate impact. Something which is, for instance, done in developmental research. But there it's hardly about research quality or research excellence, but far more about, so what is the impact that we aim to achieve, and how do we think that that's being done, and what do we think is necessary in order to get there? So there's far more a way to discuss together what is important, discuss together the vision and the way to achieve that vision, and to ensure that you keep talking and keep monitoring on the way whether you reach that or not. Now it would be ideal if we would use an approach like that in the Netherlands. We don't, but in the standard evaluation protocol, or the strategic evaluation protocol, as the next version is called, you see that there are discussions about this. So what is the relevance that you aim for as a group? What does the Commission think of that relevance? And how does a group go about? And there you see that we now introduced a far more narrative approach, where research groups are invited to tell the story about what they aim for, what they are dedicated towards, and then use indicators in order to substantiate that story. So if you really go to far more dedicated impact practices, I think that means that some evaluation practices should change as well. There's this is a very nice table which I like, because I like evaluation, where it says, so if you really want to use that way of if you go for that sort of projects, then you should really use evaluation to jointly learn about the whole process that you are embarked on. And you see on the right hand side of the table that there's a whole new way of doing an evaluation. It ends with evaluation feeds hunger for learning. It's far more about learning than about measuring or deciding. And yeah, I would like to leave it at that. And I will be working with the Rathenau Instituut until the end of the year. And in January 2021, I will move to the Center for Science and Technology Studies and I'll keep doing what I'm doing at present. Thank you.
Leonie, thank you. This is awesome. I learned so much. My brain is still processing. Now we can open it up for some questions.
If there are any questions.
Oh, Miles has his hand raised, and so does Cornell. Go ahead, Miles.
Wonderful presentation. Thank you so much. So one of the things I was thinking about is for any given research endeavor, there can be multiple spreading and unanticipated consequences or impacts. And have you thought about particular evaluation approaches that are well suited to capturing those kinds of spreading and often unanticipated effects?
It is a very nice question. So one is to be more alert during the research already. Yeah? So there's a way of flipping that around. A colleague of mine has developed. There's several ways. So there's ways where you might think you might have an impact, but you're not sure. And the interesting thing is that we always say, why don't you just reach out to certain partners? That's one. But I know of a former colleague of mine who has developed a tool where he really searches for any indication that something is being used, and whether a report or even a concept. And he found the use of reports and concepts and whatever with a variety of groups, and reported that back to the group that had provided him with those research outputs. And they were quite surprised because they hadn't realized that their work was being used in so many different places by so many different partners. I also know that there is now this idea of grimpact, the negative impact, the impact that you don't want to. So there might be negative unintended consequences. And there's not really a way to ensure that it doesn't happen, but ensuring that those who are affected or should be involved are involved is at least a way where you can try to prevent certain things. So this is really something that we need to find out. And the question also is how important is it to know where the impact is? But when you talk about negative impacts, then it might be even more important to know about it. Yeah. So this is really an interesting question and work in progress. Thank you.
Cornell, you had your hand raised.
Yes, thanks, Susan. Thank you, Leonie. It was very insightful, and it was lovely to see and get a bit of insight into the history and also the process that you followed in the Netherlands. This was not directly part of your presentation, but I'm hoping that you can maybe just provide a bit of background, if at all possible. You've mentioned in one of your slides about, doing process indicators. And so I was wondering the extent to which the shift has taken place over the years in the Netherlands, moving into theory-driven evaluations, where you make use of logic models versus the quasi-experimental impact evaluations. And the reason why I ask this question is what we started doing in South Africa, because of higher education institutions that wants to form stakeholder partnerships and really work with communities and partners on not only bringing societal impact, but for the beneficiaries, for those societies, i.e. communities, to set the targets or the indicators with the institution. Because it comes back to what Miles also asked about, you know, what is negative and what is positive impact. And sometimes what I perceive as negative, somebody else might think it's positive. And so in action research, which links a little bit to the fourth generation evaluations, but it's not quite the same. So what we've done in South Africa is to say, we do theory-driven evaluation, but when we put the logic model into a log frame to put the indicators and the sources of verification, we do that with the beneficiaries so that they say what will be meaningful, what will be effective in their opinion. And yes, brings interesting debate. You know, sometimes peer scientists, you know what they're like. They would like to see what they want to see. But in the end, we can't really claim societal impact if we want to see the change we think we want to see as a scientist versus what the beneficiary is. So I wonder if you can just shed a bit of light around theory-driven and the extent to which you do it collectively with the beneficiaries. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks. Yeah, it's interesting because the whole idea of evaluation is for me also a way where it's possible to really discuss what an endeavor really is about. When you look at the big evaluation system in the Netherlands, this the now strategic evaluation protocol, you see that by introducing the narrative, where the groups are invited to talk about what they envision and aim for, that quite implicitly they are invited to describe their theory of change as an institute. What they are invited, of course, to develop that with their societal partners, but that is something that does not really happen yet. So what we see is that the whole idea of articulating what is aimed for is still often done from the side of the researchers without their societal partners. And that move, I am involved in the development of the standard and now strategic evaluation protocol as well. The move to far more theory-driven theory of change, that is really too far out of what researchers feel
Comfortable.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But I think, and also, and this is interesting as well, so you could say, well, some universities or some departments are just there to be excellent in research. Still, I think it would be a good idea to use this approach. But there is, I think, this practice of research evaluation that is very persistent. And we see that, you know, we're trying to break it open. I might start a project with a medical charity.
Mm-hmm.
And there it is really, I think that would be the way, and I proposed it to them as well. And I said, really, you should start from the end, from the impact that you aim for, and you should develop with those involved the theory of change, and then you can identify what is necessary. You've got your process indicators, and you might solve some negative impacts on the way as well, when those involved say, hang on, this is something we don't want, or we should be careful that this doesn't happen.
Yes, yes. It's interesting that you mention, you know, that you think of doing it in the health sector, because what I found very interesting so far is that the sector that is most keen, even though they're very anxious on doing the stakeholder involvement in setting the indicators with the stakeholders, it's funnily enough the health sciences, you know, where the other sciences, even the humanities sciences and social sciences, they're a bit more reluctant not to tread there. But I find that the health sciences are really, really keen to work with communities on, you know, they go for it. in the Tufts conference that I attended a few weeks ago, they were very keen on the model that we've introduced.
Yeah.
But it's sort of they question less and want to try it and incorporate people to set the targets, where some of the other scientists are not so keen. They say, no, I'm the expert, it's best I indicate what needs to be achieved. So it's interesting how it's very similar on your side. Thanks, Leo.
Yeah, and what we see in the Netherlands is that, especially in the health sciences, when you work at an academic medical hospital, it's a really harsh working environment.
Yes.
With the focus on the science excellence on the one hand, and the idea of societal impact on the other. And then you see with a medical charity, for instance, that they say, and what do you get? We fund the researcher, and what do you get? A PhD thesis. But that was not what the project started for. So there you see that there's really a huge difference between aspirations, practices, and a good way to start solving it. Yeah.
Thanks very much.
Ben?
Thank you very much for the presentation. Thank you to ARIS for providing the platform. I'd love to hear just a little bit more about what you mentioned a little bit in passing, was like the emphasis on groups, and that there might be. I mean, is that something that's happening organically, or is there a more like systematic, like, okay, each group should have like XYZ specialties in order to cover everything? Oh no.
So in the Netherlands, autonomy is a big thing. That's one. So there's two things. So in the standard evaluation protocol, the focus has always been groups. This is different from the UK, where a group consists of individuals. In the Netherlands, a group is a group of people. But more recently, with the recognition and rewards initiative, researchers said, well, if we keep focusing on individuals and then a group is a number of individuals, then we get nowhere. But here, and you see it everywhere, the group, well, there's the university with a policy, and a group should respond to it, but usually it's on, not very detailed, but it's up to the group. So if they, and that might be, just coincidence. So who is in the group? We've got, people who are very good in education, or we've got people with a very, extended network in a specific part of society. Then that's it. And then if someone leaves and someone else comes, then the group is, differently composed. And this is rather new. So it's also something that still needs to be found out. What people now say is, well, before we had those very strict rules, you get tenure when you do this, but now when there's so many possibilities, you never know. And we are back to where we were decades ago, where it was up to some, professors to decide whether someone would get tenure or not. And now it's like, so am I the person who, with all the societal contacts, or with the good education, or, who's very good in this methodological thing and never goes out, but, does all the analyses that the other, and is this, what really is expected of me? So it's something that we embarked upon, and we don't know where we're going. We're finding it out on the go. Yeah.
Thank you.
I wish I could say more.
Yeah, I have more. I'd love to ask more, but I do know we're at time.
Well, thank you, Leonie, so much for taking your time. You're out of your evening this evening. We love hearing your presentation. We love that you're a part of our work. I can't wait to find out more about what you're going to be doing in your new position. Can you give us a little teaser about that before we get off?
Oh yeah, they were looking for someone who's got some experience with evaluation and impact, and projects with external partners, who know something about the Dutch evaluation system, who has an extensive international network as well. It's really the type of work that I like best. And the organization where I work now, the Rathenau Instituut, Parliament is really one of our most important stakeholders. And for me, research practice is what I like best. And so I keep on doing, or I need to do projects with academic groups, with funders, with whoever, in trying to find out how best to organize the research, how to develop theories of change, how to go about with evaluation, how to ensure that impact will be there. So it's really nice.
I feel like they are really in good hands with you there.
And I know some of them. Former colleagues work there. It's yeah, it's a small country, the Netherlands. Eh? Yeah, I really enjoyed I enjoyed talking about, you know, research policy in the Netherlands. It's a bit strange at this moment because I like to meet people and see people, and I haven't really met physically those people who are involved in the policy making and who experience the policies and who suffer from it. So it's still, you know, feels a bit superficial. Is there still a country where we do this? But yes, this is basically a story in headlines. Yeah. Thanks for it. Thanks for the questions.
Well, everyone have a wonderful afternoon. Cornell and Leonie, have a good evening.
Thank you.
And we'll talk soon.
Thank you. Thanks. It was brilliant. Thank you.
Thank you.